including UN agencies, representatives from the private sector, academia, think tank, civil society, and the economic, trade, and diplomatic journalists of Bangladesh. I will not take much time in describing about the report. Kind note to everyone, particularly to our journalist friends, this report will go live only at 11 p.m. Dhaka time. So please mention this during your reporting. We'll also share the soft copy of the report with all of you after 11 p.m. Dhaka time today. So before I hand it over to the chair of today's session, let me quickly set some ground rules to manage the virtual session. First, may I kindly request you to please change your names in the Zoom platform. Please go to the 3 dots on the upper right corner of your block in the Zoom screen. Click rename, put your name, comma, your organization's name. It will be easier for us to manage and recognize. Second, may I request all of you to put your microphone off if you're not speaking. We have allotted time for question, answer, and feedback session. After the presentation and deliberation from the key discussion, we'll notify you to raise your hands and keep the floor recording. And finally, the session is being live broadcasted through the UN in Bangladesh Facebook page. If you're watching live at Facebook, please comment or post your questions. We'll try to address them sequentially. So without further ado, let me hand it over to the chair of today's session, Ms. Mia Sanpo, the UN resident coordinator in Bangladesh, for her welcome remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Mia Sanpo.
Thank you, Mazed. Once again, Honorable Secretary of Commerce, thank you very much for joining us for this launch. And I just joined Mazed in the previous protocols recognizing you all. Assalamu alaikum, a very good afternoon in Dhaka, a very good morning to our UNCTAD colleagues. I'm very delighted about this launch. So, you know, my office, the UN system in Bangladesh, we're very thrilled to have this launch happen in Bangladesh and to have it happen actually before the report is even officially launched. This is very timely. This is very timely because Bangladesh has met for a second time the threshold for graduation as per the UN CDP triennial review, and is set to graduate from the LDC category by 2026. It is also very timely because this is the year when Bangladesh is celebrating its 50th anniversary of independence. And we have just had 1 week of great deliberations at the UN General Assembly 76th session, including very active advocacy by the Honorable Prime Minister and her delegation. These 50 years of independence has seen Bangladesh have a steady growth rate of more than 6% for the past decade, success in reducing poverty, and impressive strides in human development, as well as other progress in terms of structural transformation. As the UN in Bangladesh, as well as our partners at the regional and global level, we are very proud to be part of this development journey. Yet today, and these are obviously messages that have been really put into sharp focus at the ongoing UNGA session, the world is facing layers upon layers of challenges: a global pandemic, a climate crisis, and in many countries, attacks against democracy and people's fundamental rights, especially the rights of women and girls. I trust that the discussion we will have today and the Bangladesh-specific research in this flagship report of UNCTAD will enlighten some of the added challenges that Bangladesh is likely to face because of the pandemic impact on Bangladesh as well as globally. For Bangladesh, this includes impact on the manufacturing and service sectors. It includes impact on GDP growth rates, on poverty, as well as on the challenge of creating employment, including for young people entering the labor market. These added challenges from the pandemic comes on top of the known challenges that Bangladesh is facing. Of course, the graduation comes with a lot of opportunities as well, but what the discussion in Bangladesh has centered around is the need for export diversification, the need for improving private sector competitiveness and the investment climate, the need for reform of the financial and banking sector, the need for addressing the large informal sector, for ensuring inclusion of women, both in the recovery as well as in formal employment. And importantly, we are obviously faced with a country's struggle being at the front line of climate change. I believe these known challenges pre-pandemic are very well known in Bangladesh and debated quite a bit, including by many of you representing academia and think tanks. So I'm very much looking forward to a discussion that builds on what is known and identifies the policy options to tackling these challenges. Let me just take a few words to talk about the UN Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework. We have just completed a very comprehensive process of consultations across government, civil society partners, and finalized the Cooperation Framework 22-26, which is the UN's support to the national priorities in the 8th five-year plan. Many of these are obviously centered around ensuring that smooth graduation from the LDC category. This includes support to SDG financing and the integrated national financing framework. It includes institution building and strengthening resilience of business supply chain. It includes looking at necessary regulatory reforms for business entry and operations. It's support to the employment piece, including skills development, pivot, standardization, and obviously responding to calls for capacity building on negotiating trade, finance, and climate deals. The UN support to LDC graduation comes within a context of overall support, thinking through what inclusive and green recovery from the pandemic could look like. So I believe that this report that we're going to be launching today will become one more important reference document as the country is thinking through a smooth and sustainable transition strategy. I'm pleased to note that the government of Bangladesh has a high-level committee in place looking at the graduation transition. And I'm sure that our chief guest, the Commerce Secretary, will bring the discussions from this launch into that committee as well. The UN on the ground, working with partners regionally and globally, including, of course, UNCTAD, stands ready to continuously support the graduation and the smooth graduation. So with that, once more, I welcome you all to this discussion. Thank you for joining us, and back to you, Mazed.
Thank you very much, Mia, for a warm and very articulated welcome remark as always. You have set the tone astutely and I highlighted why this report is timely, particularly for Bangladesh when the country has just qualified to graduate out of LDCs. Let me now invite Mr. Rolf Traeger, Chief of LDC Section, and Mr. Giovanni Valencisi, Economic Affairs Officer from UNCTAD, to make the much-awaited presentation on the UNCTAD LDC Report 2021, which will go live today at 11 p.m. Dhaka time. We understand that the report covers analysis and provides policy recommendation for all the LDCs around the world, but we'll be very happy to have insights on how these findings connects to Bangladesh to translate into policy actions. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Rolf Traeger and Giovanni Valencisi. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And before I start presenting, I'd like to thank very much the UNRCO in Bangladesh, our colleagues, and particularly the backing of Bangladesh institutions, including the Bangladeshi government, but also Bangladeshi think tanks, which are participating in this event. And so I will present the general findings of the report, and my colleague will present those findings which are more relevant to Bangladesh. Sorry, I think you cannot see my my slides. Can you just a second?
We can see.
Can see.
We can also see it.
You have the slides. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
So let me start. Okay, so first of all, let me recall that LDC category was established 50 years ago in 1971 due to concerns with the weakest economies among all of the world's economies. But what we have seen is that 50 years later, many of the problems which beset the LDCs back then remain there. For instance, the issue of concentration of exports remain. Most LDCs are commodity dependent. It's not the case of Bangladesh, but Bangladesh has a serious issue also of dependence on a few number of products exporters. Still, in the field of international trade, LDCs continue to present a very minute part of international trade. And as the result of these ongoing challenges of development, we have had so far a very small number of countries which have graduated. So we can see that back in 1971, there were 25 LDCs. The maximum number of LDCs was reached in 1991 when we had 52. Nowadays, we have still 46 LDCs and just 6 of the LDCs have graduated out of the LDC category. Of course, in the coming years, this is going to change because countries like Bangladesh will graduate. And if we look at the performance of the LDC economies over the last 50 years, we see that half of the LDCs have fallen behind as compared to the performance of other developing countries. You have 16 which have muddled through, which means that they have by and large grown more or less at the same rhythm as other developing countries in terms of their GDP per capita. But we have only 7 which have started to catch up with the income level of other developing countries. And among these 7 LDCs which have been catching up over the last 50 years, 5 of them are in Asia, and this includes Bangladesh. And on top of it, the growth process has been prone to boom and bust cycles, and the growth decelerations have been much more frequent in the case of LDCs than in other developing countries. So now what is after 50 years of this experience, what is the present state of LDC economies? Well, these economies, they have been very hard hit by the COVID pandemic, which has led to heightened debt vulnerabilities, to reduced investment. They are prone to suffer from the ongoing reconfiguration of global value chains. There has been a large number of companies, particularly SMEs, but even micro companies which went bust because of the pandemic, lockdown, recession, etc. Okay. And there are also other problems that as a consequence of the pandemic, there have been setbacks in development progress which had been achieved previously, particularly in the field of poverty, of education, of health. And on top of it, there are the growing challenges concerning climate change, as the country representative, as the resident coordinator just mentioned. And now looking forward, there is the danger that a two-speed world recovery will leave LDCs behind, in the sense that a certain number of countries are recovering from the COVID shock, but most LDCs are experiencing problems with this. And for many LDCs, it will take them some 3 to 5 years to go back to the income levels of 2019. So In order to go beyond this look of not only the present, but also the last 50 years, we have done some estimates concerning what would it take for LDCs to reach some selected targets of the SDGs, of the Sustainable Development Goals. And we have in the more prominent targets and more economic targets, we have selected 3 of them, which are attaining the 7% growth rate on average until the end of the decade. Second, eradicating poverty, which is the very first SDG and the very first target. And finally, doubling the share of manufacturing in GDP. And what we can see is that reaching these selected SDG targets requires enormous investment on the side of LDCs. So to reach the 7% growth target would require LDCs to invest $462 billion annually. This is more than 50% higher than what LDCs actually invested in 2019. In order to eradicate poverty, they would need to invest even more. They would need to invest $485 billion annually. And if we go towards industrialization, which here is proxied by doubling the share of manufacturing in GDP, this would require an enormous amount of investment, which amount to $1 trillion annually. So just to give you an idea, this represents more than 3 times what LDCs actually invested back in 2019. And this would suppose that LDCs would have much, much higher rates of economic growth. In the case of structural transformation of industrialization, they would need to grow by 20% annually over the next 20 years. So this shows how tall a challenge this is. Going beyond these economic goals, we have also made estimates of the spending which would be required for these countries to universalize health services, to universalize education throughout their population, and to universalize social protection to all of their population, apart from another goal in biodiversity conservation. And this would require LDCs on average to spend more than 40% of their GDP on these goals, on these social and to a certain extent environmental goals. You should think that at present LDCs invest barely 10% of their GDP. So even on the social side, this gives an idea of the dimension of the challenge to LDCs to reach these sustainable development goals and goal targets over the next 10 years, which is the final period of implementation of the SDGs. So, in order to advance in the direction of reaching these development goals, not just these ones, but in the direction of implementing and reaching all development goals which are part of the SDGs, it is absolutely crucial that these countries focus their policy attention and their resources on the development of productive capacities, which we understand as the productive resources, the entrepreneurial capabilities, and the linkages between different types of economic actors, which when developed together and in a synergistic way result in the structural transformation of the economy. And what do we mean by structural transformation? We need that there is a transfer of resources, particularly a transfer of labor, of the workforce, to more productive sector, to more productive activities, which have higher labor productivity and hence higher income and therefore much higher levels of income of the population. So this is the condition, the development of productive capacities and achieving structural transformation is necessary for countries to build resilience and to increase their resistance against external shocks like the COVID shock, which these countries are still going through the crisis of the COVID shock. So this requires particularly strengthening the entrepreneurial sector of these countries, including SMEs, but also big companies, strengthening their technological capabilities, and this will lead to job creation. And this requires the coordination between domestic efforts and international policies, to which I turn now. So in terms of domestic efforts, it's absolutely crucial for LDCs to have very strong efforts in terms of industrial policy to achieve the structural transformation of their economies. And this, in turn, requires the strengthening of state capacities of LDCs to not just formulate these policies, but also to implement them. But of course, domestic efforts will not be enough. LDCs require the backing of the international community, of their development partners, including both developed countries, but other developing countries, but also international organizations. And this translates particularly in terms of international support measures in favor of LDCs. And these are the ISMs, particularly in the fields of trade, finance, and technology. In the fields of trade, it's very important that these countries preserve and possibly enlarge their preferential access to foreign markets. And this is particularly important, for instance, the case of Bangladesh, in view of the upcoming graduation. Secondly, given the enormous investment and spending requirements that we have already mentioned, we know that just the domestic resource mobilization will not be enough. That's why LDCs need increasing support from the international community, particularly in terms of the allocation of special drawing rights, which were decided by the International Monetary Fund in August, except that the problem is that right now, under present rules, it would be just $15 billion, which would be allocated to LDCs. These countries, as we have seen, they need much, much more than this. But also they need an increase in other forms of official development assistance. And in terms of technology, LDCs are in dire need of increased technology transfer to them, increased strengthening of their technological capabilities through a series of mechanisms, by a transfer of technology from developed countries to developing countries, to LDCs, but also by the inclusion of local technological capability building clauses in international investment regimes, but also in international cooperation to build infrastructure. This will help strengthen the local entrepreneurial base and enhance their productivity and their capacity to generate decent jobs. So I finish here my remarks, and I give the floor to my colleague Giovanni Valencisi, who will discuss more what are the implications of our research to the specific case of Bangladesh. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I'll just be elaborating on a few key messages of the report that resonate particularly with the current situation of Bangladesh, and in particular, 5 key messages that we think are critical for what we call graduation with momentum, meaning a sustainable form of graduation. So I think the first issue, which was also touched upon in the opening remarks by the resident coordinator, Ms. Seppo, is that rapid and resilient growth has been critical in explaining Bangladesh progress so far. We find in the report that Bangladesh is one of those 7 LDCs which are found to have been catching up over the past 50 years. However, GDP per capita of Bangladesh is nowadays only about 15% of the world average, which implies that there's a much longer trajectory that needs to be covered. At the current context, we also find that Bangladesh growth performance has been relatively resilient. In the past, there were only 2 episodes of growth deceleration, which we have identified in the report at the onset of independence and during the 1997 financial crisis. Again, also with COVID, the country displayed a fairly encouraging resilience and managed to maintain some positive level of GDP growth, even though, of course, there was a clear slowdown. Now, what is critical is to maintain investment, particularly not only physical investment, but also in terms of human capital. And we know that the education sector has been badly affected by the pandemic, of course, globally. And we also need to ensure that vulnerable categories are protected, especially because, for instance, firms' bankruptcies or closures may lead to losing productive capabilities, and therefore we find that some protection towards the worst impacts of the recovery are also needed to avoid these capabilities to be lost. The second key point that we find resonates very much with Bangladesh's situation is the need to maintain the momentum in structural transformation. In the past, what we've seen is the labor productivity, average labor productivity in Bangladesh between 1995 and 2018 has grown at approximately 6% per year. And manufacturing was critical to this in 2 ways. First of all, it displayed a within sector productivity growth, which was fairly significant, but also it absorbed labor from less productive sector and therefore lifted the average. Symmetrically, agriculture displayed a very fast labor productivity growth within the sector, but the share of employment accounted for by agriculture declined over time. Now, if we look at the services sector, which you see in the graph below, we do see certain services compartment that grew very fast, but others did not as much. So now the issue is that in order to maintain this momentum for structural transformation, we need to exploit and stimulate a denser network of input-output linkages within the domestic economy in order to sustain the growth in manufacturing, but also trying to stimulate the growth of modern services. And we could think about the digital economy, we could think of the distribution and logistics, and so on. To reach this goal, it is important to focus on economic diversification, and doing so by adopting and implementing bold industrial policies. The third message that I think is very important that we find in the report is that Bangladesh progress so far has relied heavily on international support measures, most notably preferential market access. Now, this shows that the government has been strategically very clever in harnessing these measures. At the same time, however, they led to growing export concentration on textile and clothing, particularly ready-made garment, and also it becomes now a double-edged sword at the moment of graduation. Now, in order to ensure that that the phasing out of international support measures does not affect the country's progress, what is needed in our view is mainstreaming graduation into this industrial policy framework by trying to gradually build up the competitiveness that is needed in order to absorb the phasing out of the ISMs, and also focus on science, technology, and innovation. In the past, the country has made great strides in terms of education-related outcomes, and we can build on those successes. And for example, on the emergence of the pharmaceutical, for instance, sector, in order to strengthen even further science, technology, and innovation. Fourth message is that domestic resource mobilization is a crucial determinant of the country's institutional capacities to adopt and implement a sustainable development investment framework. In the case of Bangladesh, what we think are key priorities is the fact of unleashing private investment even further. Right now, we see that the country has increased its investment ratio to roughly 31% of GDP, but this has been accompanied by a growing reliance on external sources of financing, especially remittances. More can be done to unleash this process also on the private sector side. And finally, to reiterate a point that was made by Rolf, SDG financing needs remain considerable, even in the case of Bangladesh. The Planning Commission a few years ago had estimated that the average cost per year to achieve the SDG would average 66 billion per year at 2015 prices. We find that, especially in light of the climate change impact, these costs are very sizable. Now, domestic resource mobilization is, of course, crucial, particularly if we think that the tax revenues remain below 10% of GDP. However, it is clear that domestic resource mobilization alone will be insufficient, and particularly a month ahead of the COP26, we find that in light of the climate change impact and the vulnerability of the country to this challenge, international support is imperative. And I think I will close here and look forward to more discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rolf and Giovanni, for a very comprehensive presentation on the major findings. Particular thank to you connecting the findings with Bangladesh and articulating the policy recommendations from Bangladesh perspective. I would not summarize. At this stage, we would like to hear from Professor Mustafizur Rahman, Distinguished Fellow, Center for Policy Dialogue, Bangladesh. I think he needs no introduction. But before I give it the floor, sir, we'd be very interested to hear from you what's new in this report. Can we say different in this report in terms of analysis and policy recommendations that will be critical for Bangladesh during this transition period? Now, we understand that COVID has definitely intensified many of the pre-existing vulnerabilities and added many challenges. But how do you see this report, along with other international reports, particularly the policy recommendations, would help Bangladesh to tailor the transition strategy that they are now developing? Sir, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, moderator. UNRCO, Ms. Mia Sepo, Chief guest of this session, Mr. Tapan Kante Ghosh, Honorable Secretary, Minister of Commerce, dear audience. This is indeed a privilege to be a discussant of a flagship report. And I have been associated with this type of launching for a number of years. But this year it is very special because the report itself is very special. As you will see, it will be seen when the report is mentioned that about the report, Harvard Kennedy School professor Celestine Monga, he said that this is a game-changing report. And I think that really this is a departure in the sense that it takes a historical perspective also on the LDCs, 50 years. The report subtitle is Learning from 50 Years of Experience. So this is a distinctive departure, I think, of the report. And the overall, the message of the report, which Rolf and Giovanni have authored, is that from a long-term perspective, the growth performance of LDCs over the past 50 years is mixed at best and has generally been sluggish and uneven. And Rolf has shown that in the three categories, and Bangladesh is an outlier because we have performed relatively better than other LDCs. But let me also mention with regard to what Rolf has presented, is that he has rightly mentioned that in 1971, we started with 25 LDCs, and after 50 years, we are 46 LDCs. So that also gives us some idea about what really we have been able to achieve in terms of helping the LDCs to graduate. And now, as we stand in 2021, we have indeed 7 LDCs which have been slated for graduation in a concrete timeline, and also 16 LDCs which have been identified for graduation. So we have 23 LDCs out of the 46 which will start their graduation journey, 50% of the LDCs, and that's what was the target that was set up in the decadal LDC4 program of action in Istanbul in 2011, halving the number of LDCs by 2020. So, but I would like also to mention that the HAI, the Human Asset Index, and the Economic Vulnerability Index, these two indexes were fixed in 2012. And that was also one of the reasons for which many of the countries were able to cross the thresholds and graduate. I think this is important from the point that Rolf has mentioned, that even when countries have graduated, they are graduating with many embedded structural weaknesses. We will have to remember that. And since I wanted to look at the report from Bangladesh perspective, a graduating LDC perspective, and as the report has rightly mentioned, it is one of the case studies in the report that Bangladesh has done well in terms of many of the indicators and sub-indicators, GNI per capita, human asset index, economic vulnerability index. But at the same time, the report also mentions the structural weaknesses, meaning that that inputs going into sectors where productivity is higher. And indeed, Bangladesh has been able to shift, as Rolf has rightly mentioned, shift from agriculture to non-agriculture sector, mainly services. And we know that the manufacturing is still only a small percentage of the GDP. But if we still look at even agriculture, 42% of the labor in agriculture producing 13% of the GDP, we can understand what is the labor productivity in the agriculture. 42% of the labor producing 13% of the GDP. So we will have to have structural transformation, as was mentioned. And I think this is very important because all the economies and Bangladesh economy also, we have been impacted by the pandemic, and obviously building back better is something that we will have to do. And Rolf has rightly mentioned, I think Giovanni as well, that the world is having a two-speed recovery, but within countries also we see two-speed recovery. In the Bangladesh context also, it's a K-type of recovery. We have done well in terms of our agriculture growth, but in the services sector, still the footprints of the pandemic are still there. Now, if we look at from Bangladesh and the 5 messages that Giovanni has mentioned, I think that all these messages are very pertinent. Graduation will mean that beyond 2026, Bangladesh will have to make a transition from predominantly preferential market access driven competitiveness to productivity and skills driven competitiveness. I think that is in one sentence, if I can capture the message. So if we want to do that, then obviously we will have to have more investment in productivity enhancement, more investment in skills upgradation. We have to, in light of the SDGs, we will have to double the contribution of the manufacturing sector. And there, the suggestions that has been put, and I think it is also important from the perspective of development organizations like UN, and the report rightly mentions about the the very worrying signs of development aid, the percentage not reaching the targets, and the actions not bringing the desired impact. So from that perspective, and also what the UNRCO has also mentioned, we will have to redirect our foreign aid to sectors where really it will matter. For example, domestic resource mobilization was mentioned, and 10% of the GDP only in Bangladesh, one of the lowest even in South Asia. So if we want to enhance that, then our aid will also have to go to those sectors where really it will matter in how to facilitate our mobilization of resources, how to strengthen our institutions which mobilize these resources. Then productivity, we will have to redirect the aid to sectors where it will contribute towards productivity and skills enhancement. Mia Seppo has mentioned about negotiating capacities. There will be, the graduation will have impact on our domestic policy space, and that means that we will have to negotiate on the basis of reciprocity as against non-reciprocity. Where are our offensive interests? Where are our defensive interests? What negotiating stance we will have to take? And so support for negotiation, for example, is something which is coming up. So new international support measures will be required, which has been very strongly highlighted, and I agree with the report, that when the special and differential treatment that are there in the WTO, 183 under 16 agreements, many of those are specific to the LDCs. These will not be there. We will lose the preferential market access given to the LDCs, not there. So how do we enhance our productivity? How do we make more investment in the sectors that has been mentioned? Rolf perhaps mentioned that the health, education, and social safety net, which is currently 10%, we will have to take it to 40% of the GDP. Now, the question that I as an economist ask, if it is to be taken from 10% to 40% of the GDP, there will have to be sectors whose share will have to be reduced, because total will not be greater than 100. Total will be 100. So can we reduce infrastructure investment? Can you reduce investment in agriculture? So I think that it's the size of the domestic resource mobilization which will matter rather than more percentage. Of course, percentage will have to be increased, but there is a limit to it because we cannot decrease other percentages. So I think that redirecting aid, and which was mentioned in the report, that the promise of 0.15% to 0.20%, that has not materialized. So I think that the development partners, and they have also mentioned about the dominance of the Washington consensus, which is still there. And one of the suggestions that was mentioned in the report is also for a new type of debt relief for the countries. I think the report also could have mentioned that these LDCs like Bangladesh, which are making the graduation journey, and after 50 years, that is also celebration for our country. We became LDC in December 1975, and we will be getting out in 2026 after 50 years. That's a celebration. But what I want to also mention, that we are making also a second graduation, which is the graduation from low-income country to a lower middle-income country, which means that the rate of interest that we are now getting the loans at, that rate is also changing. We are no more an IDA country, we are a blend country, and after a couple of years before the graduation, LDC graduation, we will be a non-blend country. IBRD country. So the interest rate is increasing from 0.75 or 1% to 2 to 3%. So this suggestion, I think, is very important, that we need a new type of international support measures, new ISMs for the graduating LDCs as well. And there, I think the proposal that the LDCs have submitted in the WTO General Council for extension of the SNDTs, special and differential treatment, for 12 more years after a country has graduated is very important. And since this report is being released after, in view of the MC12, which will take place on 30th November to 3rd December this year, after 4 years after Argentine, MC11, I think this report is very pertinent in pointing out that there is a need for international support mechanisms. I would have thought that the proposal that has been put in the WTO for extension of for 12 years, if not 12 years, then at least 7 years, that is a point of negotiation. I think that is also very important to point out over here. One last point that in this context, what I would like to mention is that on page 101, it was shown that if we want to, and Rolf mentioned it, if we want to double the contribution of the manufacturing sector in the GDP, Bangladesh will need huge amount of new investment. And there, I think that reallocation of investment into targeted sector is very important. One point that I would like to mention is that in the report on page 76, inequality was mentioned, but in the context of Bangladesh, it was mentioned that between 1983 to 2016, it increased from 0.26 to 0.32, and then it has plateaued, and it is not a major concern. But we in Bangladesh, we know that, I don't know where from this data has come, but in Bangladesh, our own BBS, Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics, shows that between 2010 to 2016, Gini coefficient has indeed increased from 0.46 to 0.48. And the pandemic, I presume, it has worsened. So 0.48 Gini coefficient obviously is a cause for concern for Bangladesh. And our policymakers also mentioned that in spite of our growth momentum, and we will have to graduate with momentum, as was rightly mentioned, smooth graduation, graduation with momentum, and sustainable graduation. These are the our ambitions. And finally in the report, I'm very happy that the SDGs have been mentioned in the report, because we are now in the second of the 3 laps of SDGs, as we say. So this is a very crucial moment. Now, in the context of the SDGs, and our vision document 2041, our perspective document 2021-2041, we call it the vision document, with which I was fortunate to be associated with. So that document says that Bangladesh by 2041 will be a developed economy, will be socially inclusive and environmentally sustainable. Now, if we really want to achieve those aspirations, I think that inclusive growth will become very important. Inequality remains a concern in Bangladesh, and I think that in order to reduce inequality, more decent jobs, more productive jobs, more skills will be needed. In Bangladesh, in GDP, the wage share is decreasing. So I think that remains a concern. So I think that as we move towards towards graduation, I think that we will have to do our own homework. At the same time, the development community, which has been very rightly mentioned in the report, they will also have to come in a strategic way in strategic sectors. And if that can be done, I think that Bangladesh will be able to graduate with momentum. It will be sustainable graduation, and it will be an inclusive graduation. So I would like to once again congratulate the authors for an excellent report. And I think that we can draw a lot of policy insights from the report. And Honorable Secretary is here. I think that the Bangladesh delegation, when it will go for MC12, we will be able to benefit from where to focus our negotiations and discussions. Thank you very much for giving me this honor. I really feel very privileged in speaking before this august audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mustafizur Rahman. As always, you have highlighted key areas where Bangladesh should put primary emphasis going forward. I will not be able to actually summarize. You have highlighted some brilliant points: structural transformation, productivity enhancement. Very interestingly, moving from this incentive-based ISMs to competition-based advantages. Domestic resource mobilization has been talked about, particularly the size institutions, and you have also highlighted the requirement of new ISMs, global negotiations, particularly through MC12, which is coming in WTO. Thank you once again, sir. Now we are getting into the question answer session and feedback remarks session, I would say. I'm seeking attention from our journalist friends who have kindly joined the launching. Please let us know if you have any questions regarding the presentation or the key discussions. Rolf, Giovanni, Mustafizur Rahman sir, everyone will be able to answer. I would also like to, we have our Honorable Commerce Secretary with us. Sir, we'd be very happy and highly obliged if you want to also take participate in the question and answer and participate in the discussion. May I request you to please mention your name and agency before putting the question. Also, please let us know if you have any preferred respondent from the presenters. We'll take two, three questions in one round and move accordingly. Please raise your hand and then we can accordingly. So we have one hand from SM Rashidul Islam. Can you unmute and ask the question, please?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, good afternoon. My question to the Mr. Rolf. LDCs, you know, LDCs are not getting the required vaccines through COVAX. Bangladesh has a vibrant pharmaceutical industry. You know, one manufacturer has also entered into contract with China for vaccine production. How can high-income countries help Bangladesh in vaccine production? And my question also, what policy actions are required for Bangladesh to get support such as FDI and technology? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Yotaka, we have Yotaka Yoshino from World Bank. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a very interesting presentation. My name is Yutaka Yoshino. I'm lead country columnist for Bangladesh and Bhutan from the World Bank based in Dhaka. So I have a couple of points that I would like to share with the presenters and also maybe discuss. And I don't have any particular respondent I expect, but I just want to table just a couple points. There's a lot of discussion about you know, the raising more resources for development and post LDC graduation, and absolutely true. The question I have is that what do you think is the role of the private sector financing for that development needs, and particularly not only the fact that you know, the tax to GDP ratio in Bangladesh is very low, but also FDI is very low in Bangladesh as well, less than 1%. So what do you see the role of the foreign direct investment going forward? I also have really agree with the presentation in terms of the need to raise more domestic resources, not only for the financing domestic development needs, but also the fact is that part of the story behind export concentration, particularly on ready-made garment in Bangladesh, is coming from the fact that this is kind of like an enclave support of the policy to that particular sector, which has been, of course, very successful, but also it leaves all the agenda of reforming tariff regime in Bangladesh unaddressed. And then Bangladesh continues to be one of the most protective tariff regime. So how to remove anti-export bias in the tariff regime is very important, but that also means that there has to be from tax on trade, like a
Good morning.
into improving efficiency and effectiveness of domestic tax, like value-added tax. So in that context, I think the domestic resource mobilization has to be addressed in the context of trade reforms and also preparation for LDC graduation. I just want one small remarks and clarification on IBLD. There was a comment about it. I just want to mention that, the Bangladesh at the moment is 100% financed from the IDA, from the World Bank. And the Bangladesh already reached the lower middle income income category in July 2015. It will have some more years for the country to benefit from IDA. And of course, it is true that gradually the country should get prepared for the IBLD financing, but it will take some time, not immediately, together with LDC graduation, because the World Bank financing, basically the process is based on a slightly different process from the LDC graduation. So I just wanted to have that clarification put on the table as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yotaka. I think we have three very specific questions. Let's finish this round and go to the second round. So there's a question to Rolf directly about pharma deals and that stuff. Yotaka has highlighted asked questions about the role of private sector and the tariff regime very particularly. So we can start off with Rolf, and then Mustafisa or Giovanni, anyone wants to take tariff or role of private sector part.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to thank the two persons who have made remarks and questions. I think that the issue of the pharmaceutical industry is, it is a particularly critical industry in which Bangladesh has been very effective in developing it, in the production of generic drugs, etc. And all of this has been achieved under the flexibilities of the TRIPS agreement, of the non-requirement to comply with most of the requirements of the TRIPS agreements of the WTO. So, this is one of the issues which need to be thought in terms of the impact of graduation. Of course, in principle, unless the request of LDCs is approved, there will be the need to comply with TRIPS requirements. And what are the consequences of this for the pharmaceutical industry? This is just a very critical example of how countries need to prepare for graduation, and in particular in the case of Bangladesh, how industrial policy and technological upgrading needs to be prepared for graduation. And now, more concretely, how can vaccine production be strengthened in the case of Bangladesh? I think there is a strong role for international negotiations. At the very beginning, the resident coordinator mentioned the capabilities of negotiations. So it's not just trade agreements, it's also technological transfer agreements, which are important. And I think that there is a very strong role for government to play in negotiating with partners, be they China, be they developed countries or India, whatever, in order to strengthen the technological capabilities of the domestic pharmaceutical industry. Now, and this, in a sense, is one example of the importance of the private sector. We do put as one of our major recommendations the importance of developing a very strong, technologically proficient, diversified and dense tissue of domestic enterprises. So, this talks to the importance of policies for science, technology and innovation, of investment policies, but also of entrepreneurship policies. And it's very important that in these policies for the development of the private sector, there is synergy and combination between the development of the domestic private sector and of the foreign private sector. Mention was made that there is relatively little FDI, contrary to many other Asian countries. But it's important not to attract FDI for the sake of FDI, but for the potential contribution that FDI can give to the development of domestic productive capacities, and to create synergies between the foreign entrepreneurial sector and the domestic entrepreneurial sector. And I think I'll stop here. I don't know if the others want to come in as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Rolf. Mustafa sir or Giovanni, anyone wants to take anything on the private sector?
Yes.
I think Rolf has covered some part, but yeah, please. Thank you.
Can I?
Yes, please, sir.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moderator. I think the Rolf has responded to Mr. Rashidul Islam's question, but I would like to just compliment by saying that now there is a proposal in the WTO submitted by India and South Africa and supported by more than 100 countries in order to have a waiver from the TRIPS agreement so that countries can produce vaccines. So I think that in view of the MC12, when the Secretary of Commerce is here, I think that there may be a decision at MC12 in order to give that. Now already the good sign is that at the beginning USA and EU were not very supportive, but now they have come up whether to give it in the form of a compulsory licensing or in the form of a waiver. That is the question now. Text-based negotiations are going on. So I think that our strategy should be to join hands with others so that there is a waiver from the TRIPS. So this is by way of what Rolf has said, supplementing that. With regard to the second question by our World Bank friend, Mr. Yutaka Yoshino, I think a very valid observation. We will have to increase our FDI. And if you ask me, special economic zones which the government is setting up, I think can be a game changer. If we can have not only unencumbered land, but also implementing the one-stop service and providing the other facilities on the one hand, and on the other, as Rolf has very rightly mentioned, we don't want FDI just for the sake of FDI. We will have to also build our human resources, human capacities, so that our people also get decent jobs in this special economic zones. So that is also very important. Special economic zones could be one if you can complement it with other initiatives. And I agree that we had for ready-made garments an enclave type of support. This should be more broad-based. And there are some tariff reforms required. That also I think is very important, and that's where, as was mentioned in the report, the new international support measures should be targeted to this type of capacity building. I have read in World Bank report that $1 of support to, for example, National Revenue Board can give you a 50 times return. So I think that we will need to redirect the foreign support also to these sectors and capacity building. With regard to the interest rate, yeah, I agree that there may be some time, but an LDC graduation and middle income graduation is a World Bank term. LDC graduation is a UN term. So and the World Bank has already put Bangladesh into blend category. So we may have some time, but we should be ready that the future loans that we are talking about will mainly be non-concessional. It will have less maturity. It will have more stringent conditions. So I think that we will have to keep that in mind. Many countries have fallen into middle income trap because of their indebtedness. So I think that we should avoid that, and we should keep in mind that the foreign aid will become costly as we go forward, and it will coincide with our LDC graduation. So that was the point that I wanted to just in terms of alerting our policymakers to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, Rob. I'll get back to Giovanni. We are also keeping the time. It's already almost 4 p.m. Or past 4 p.m. So I'm now taking a second round of questions. May I request Ms. Tasnim Mohsin from Ajke Putrika, then Mr. Rifayat from Daily Star, and Shabnam Mishra from EU Delegation Bangladesh. We cannot hear you.
Thank you, moderator. Can you hear me? Hello.
Yes,
hello.
we can hear you.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear
Thank
you.
you so much for the opportunity. Yes, I haven't gone through the report because I haven't seen it, but so far from the discussion I have understand. I mean, for the sustainable for the sustainable graduation from the LDC, Bangladesh need to move from GSP dependency to skill development and manufacturing sector. I mean, is there any specific or any particular sector of investment? I mean, UN or our Ministry of Commerce has asking for this investment, like in skill or in manufacturing sector. Like, if we talk about the garment sector, do we need more investment in our garment sector, or rather than any other sector? Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. We got your question. Thank you. Mr. Rifayat, Daily Star.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. Actually, when I raised my hand, I had some question, but my question more or less has already been answered by Mustafa sir. Still, I am asking the question regarding the pharmaceuticals waiver. Being an LDC, Bangladesh pharmaceuticals industry will enjoy the TRIPS waiver up to January 1, 2033, if I'm not wrong. There is a problem among us when we want to write report on it. When Bangladesh will be graduated 2026, will this benefit continue up to 2033? This is number one question. The second question is, it is already been tasked to some extent. The Bangladesh, along with other LDCs, have already demanded 12 years preferential trade special treatment, tariff benefit after the graduation. Most probably in April this year, because of the severe fallout of the COVID all over the world. What is the latest situation of this move? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your questions. Ms. Shabnam Mishra from EU Delegation, your remarks, please. Question.
Thank you, Mr. Mazid. First of all, thanks for the presentation. It was quite comprehensive. So I have two specific questions. One on the importance that has been posed on the social protection part. So my question around social protection is there any specific guidance around the social protection that can be addressed towards the need of the workers, specifically pertaining to the industrial sector? So that is one. And on the other hand, partially my question has been addressed by the experts already, because what my World Bank colleague has already shared his question. So what I would like to understand a bit more is the role of the incentive around creating a conducive environment for investment, or to be more specific, towards green investment. because so far what we see is the overall structure which is there in the incentive system may not be well aligned across different government agencies. So how important it would be to have an overall reform in the structure of incentive system in Bangladesh for moving towards this LDC graduation. Thank you. Over to the experts.
No, thank you very much. So we can start from Giovanni. The questions primarily are, there are three. One is a bit of clarification required around the pharmaceutical one, which is whether we will continue to get it before 2026. And there's a question around export diversification, I think he meant, which is what manufacturing sector should we concentrate on, government as a priority or not. And also we have a question around social protection, any guidance, and also green investment, what are the different priorities for government. So we can start from Giovanni, then to very quickly, because we really need to finish first. So I'll request if you can respond very good. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I would start with the question on the specific sectors. Of course, it's something that needs to be studied and looked at the national level, obviously, also for reasons of policy coherence. But in our work jointly also with other organizations, we have seen various examples of promising sectors that could be, for example, the development of alternative fibers for the ready-made garment, from Utah to man-made fibers. It could be, for example, logistics and distribution that I mentioned before, the whole sphere of the digital economy and digital services, but also to come to the green sectors, biomasses, electricity generation, which could have co-benefits in terms of strengthening the linkages between, for example, agriculture and electricity generation. I think also I wanted to come back also a little bit on the issue of the special economic zones, because they're an excellent example of what we meant by saying that graduation needs to be mainstreamed into industrial policy. Of course, there's a lot of investment being made by the government, both at institutional level and physical, in developing this. But the whole graduation process needs to be mainstream in there, because the incentive sector to attract foreign direct investment can no longer rely on a long term on the preferential market access. So we need to think about new ways of pitching, so to speak, the special economic zones for potential investors. And this needs to be aligned with the industrial policy framework that we have in mind, setting the right incentive system around the sectors which we think are critical. And of course, health is one of them. Concerning the other questions, it seems to me that the negotiation that is going on the TRIPS proposal by the LDCs also contains some provisions on a transition period. I haven't followed in the recent days, the daily back and forth with the tax negotiation, but that is mentioned in the proposal.
Thank you very much, Giovanni. Mustafa sir, quickly, and then we will go to
okay. Very quickly. I think Rolf has answered some of those. With regard to the pharmaceuticals, let me clarify. Yes, it was extended for 17 years in 2015 till December 31, 2032. But since Bangladesh will be graduating in 2026, Bangladesh will not be eligible for this derogation beyond 2026, unless there is another agreement in order the one that was floated. So if that is accepted for some years, to that extent we will get it. But till now, beyond 2026, we will not be eligible, although the derogation itself continues till 2032 end. So that is the one. The other point with regard to what is happening with the proposal that was floated by Chad on behalf of the group of LDCs as coordinator, where Bangladesh extended strong support. That was floated on 16th of December 2020 at the General Council of the WTO. Now there will be negotiations, and when the ministers meet in December this year in Geneva, there may be program maximum. The most optimistic is that we do get an extension beyond graduation for 12 years. So, but I think as someone who follows the negotiations, it is not going to happen. So it may be for a small, shorter time, maybe 7 years. That is also very good, beyond graduation for an additional 7 years. Or there may be a decision which may be likely, Secretary will be knowing better, which is that a working group is formed to discuss the issue. So that is, that's how it stands as of now. With regard to the question by Ishrat, I think that yes, we will have to recalibrate our social protection also, because if we look at the policies of European Union, for example, the GSP plus, they are talking about labor rights, they are talking about environmental protection, climate change. So even if we graduate, we will be eligible for general GSP or GSP plus. But in order to get into those, we'll have to, beyond the 27, they have now added the proposal that is will be discussed at the European Parliament. We will have to now comply not 27 but 32. Child labor, support to the physically challenged, environmental protection, climate change, so the incentives will have to be recalibrated once we, in view of the graduation. And so I think that is, and the last point is that since you have raised about the green growth, which is very important, I think that the global community should also support technology transfer of green technology, and I think that is also very, very important. Some of these are very costly, some of these are protected. So I think that facilitating green technology is also something that we should work on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Giovanni. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Professor Mustafizur Rahman. A very good discussion, and thank you for all the discussions who come up with questions and comments. Sorry, Azan is going on, probably you're hearing. So we are almost at the end of the program. I'm sure our Honorable Commerce Secretary, sir, has heard all these things. We cannot thank you enough who has listened to the whole discussion. So without any further delay, let me hand it over to our Chief Guest, Honorable Commerce Secretary, for to briefly summarize his takeaway and also for his closing remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, Honorable Commerce Secretary, thank you.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues from UNCTAD, UN Resident Representative Ms. Mia Seppo, distinguished participants, good afternoon. I am happy to join the virtual launching event of the LDC Report 2021 of UNCTAD. Bangladesh is at a critical juncture this year as we embark on the journey for graduation from LDC status. 2021 is also a significant year for us. We are proud of our golden jubilee of Bangladesh's independence, and respectfully, with deep respect, we remember the sacrifice of father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, as we celebrate his birth centenary. We have multiple challenges ahead of us: COVID-19, of course, climate change, and the loss of international support measures after graduation. You are aware that Bangladesh government has formed 6 subcommittees under the overall leadership of Principal Secretary to the Honorable Prime Minister to successfully identify the challenges and to turn them into opportunities. So each subcommittee is headed by a secretary of the ministry comprising of relevant stakeholders and the private sector, and they are working intensively to have the action plan that would be implemented during the next 5 years. As we collaborate with the government and with the private sector, we also want to work with the UN agencies. Actually, we have been working with UN agencies, and Bangladesh is a very active partner in all the UN bodies, UNDP, UNCTAD, and other agencies, to develop a holistic plan to ride the graduation journey smoothly in a sustainable fashion. UNCTAD's recent report on Bangladesh's vulnerability and today's LDC report are useful documents in our preparation to make a smooth transition strategy. At the trade front, we know that Bangladesh will be losing unilateral market access that she has enjoyed as an LDC, coupled with lack of diversification in our export items. RMG export stuck with low-end products, overall low productive efficiency, and skill gap impedes our potential to be fully utilized. Our UN friends can provide us with analytical policy report on how to increase productive efficiency, how to move to higher value-added RMG products, how to facilitate a structural transformation and make new markets abroad, how to upskill the workforce, create jobs, and maximize the use of the demographic dividend that Bangladesh is currently enjoying. We know we need the support of UN bodies in international forums as well. When the UNCTD recommended Bangladesh for graduation, they also highlighted the need for continued support, particularly ISMs for the graduating LDCs. The LDC group has made submissions in this regard at the WTO. It is essential that graduating LDCs are not left on their own after graduation. Recently, while visiting Geneva, we met with Director General WTO, headed by our Honorable Foreign Minister. So we have discussed regarding this submission, and all the, particularly the LDC group in WTO in Geneva, they are working along with our missions in New York. So we are hopeful that maybe that extension, if not 12 years, but as Professor Mustabizur Rahman has already mentioned, that somewhere in between is being, considered. So finger crossed. I think before MC12, maybe they could reach a consensus whereby if the developed countries they agree on certain issues, then we can hopefully get this extension for a few more years after the graduation. I understand that interagency task team comprising of UN and other international organizations have been formed on trade and productive capacity. Bangladesh would be particularly interested to benefit from such interagency collaboration. We will be happy to welcome you to the Ministry of Commerce to discuss how to address the issue of productive efficiency and structural transformation in the Bangladesh context. I thank UNCTAD for preparing the LDC report 2021. I hope the recommendations shed light on how to address the challenges that Bangladesh will be facing after graduation. LDC graduation is a journey where support of all international partners will be essential. We hope the new program of action for LDCs to be adopted in Doha in LDC 5 conference next January will take a pragmatic approach towards the needs of the graduating LDCs. The recommendations from this report, along with other UN reports, will be good contributions in finalizing the new program of action. The report correctly highlights that Bangladesh has done reasonably well in facing the COVID-19 pandemic. Under the visionary leadership of the Honorable Prime Minister of Bangladesh, we have been relentlessly dealing with the adverse impacts of the pandemic and the climate change. Bangladeshi pharmaceutical companies have the capacity to produce COVID-19 vaccines locally. We look for international partnerships to produce the vaccine, which will save many lives beyond in Bangladesh and beyond Bangladesh. Any support from the UN agencies or from the technology bank in getting the technology will benefit many lives of the world. In this regard, I would like to mention the recently published EU GSP regulation, proposed EU GSP regulation, whereby we have seen that the European Union has rightly included the provision whereby the graduating LDC countries would be included in the GSP plus, platform. So there would be an occasion of smooth transition. And I think, and we would urge upon the all UN and international community to press upon the demand like this, so that in other countries also, in other particularly developed and developing countries, the LDC graduating countries could be allowed to have this sort of grace period to have their smooth transition after the graduation. I thank the UNDP for inviting me to today's event. I hope to continue working with our colleagues in UNCTAD, UNDP, and other UN agencies, and invite you to collaborate with us in our graduation journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for your closing remarks. Mia, you can just end the meeting with your closing remarks.
All right. Well, let me close by first of all thanking the Honorable Secretary for staying with us throughout and listening in to this conversation. We very much appreciate that, and obviously very much appreciate your invite to come and discuss follow-up with you. We will certainly pick up on that. Big thanks to Mustafa Fizul Rahman for your comments, as well as for your very elaborate participation in the responses from the discussants. Huge thanks to our UNCTAD colleagues, Giovanni and Ralph. It's great. As you could hear, if you do a pre-launch of your report again a second time, Bangladesh is your venue. This is a good place to do it. There's lots of interest. This is a country that very much cares about the LDC graduation, which is like taking a strategic approach to the LDC graduation, recognizing both the opportunities and the challenges. And that's obviously under the leadership of these 6 subcommittees and the big committee led by the Principal Secretary PMO, as Secretary referred to. But it is also thanks to the engagement from development partners. You have all the questions we had, and the engagement from the think tanks and academia. So with that, thank you all for staying over time. Thanks for joining. Thanks for an excellent discussion. We will all be waiting for 11 p.m. to read the full report. Thank you. Stay well. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks
Thank you.
a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Ralph.
Thank you, Majid. Thank you.
Giovanni.
Thank you. Rolf, Giovanni, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mustafa Fizul.
Yeah, we'll be in touch with regard
Definitely.
to our work.